I got an exciting episode for you today. I am joined by Justin Rowan from the Chase Down podcast to talk lineups and trade deadline. I'm Zach. Welcome to the Sports Ethos Cleveland Cavaliers podcast, your safe space to celebrate and nerd out about the Cavs. And when I say nerd out, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking hoops backed by stats you've actually heard of. To join in the discussion, use hashtag CavsCast on social media. Now, my chat with Justin. Today, I am joined by Cleveland Cavalier podcast royalty. He is one half of the Chase Down podcast, part of the official Cavs media family, a show I've listened to for years and a true inspiration for this podcast coming to be. And I mean that to not just make him uncomfortable, but also because I'm a little fangirl and he's here. It's Justin Rowan. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, I'm wildly uncomfortable. Thank you for that. You've already had me on my back foot. I hate it, but thank you so much for having me. Stoked to be here and stoked to be talking Cavs, man.
Before we jump into our main discussion, there is one question I want to ask, and it's more selfish for me. What is it like being the official Cavs pod? Are there like super cool perks that us mere podcasting mortals should be super jealous of?
I would say the coolest perk is just that they do have us down there. Getting to go to Cleveland more frequently than they did when I was just doing this on my own. I used to pay to go down and and see the games and whatnot, and that has absolutely been the coolest part of it. And the funny thing for me is, and this probably is a reflection of how big of a dork I am, getting to like talk to various people in the media, getting to talk to the people with the team and whatnot, more so than the players. Like that's what I get geeked about. I get geeked about like the little relationships and everything that kind of comes along with it more than talking to the players. But yeah, I would say going down, getting to see games, getting to go to NBA playoff games has been the coolest part of this for sure.
Nice. You saying that you're into geeking out over this, you're in the right place. This is the Cavs Nerd Out podcast. So you've found your people in this particular instance. But one of the things that I like to do when I bring on a guest is I try to tailor the topic to lean into something kind of unique about them. Like for instance, when I had Spin Davies on, we really spent that whole conversation about personalities in the locker room and kind of give us that peek behind that curtain, because we non credentialed media members don't have that kind of access. What in it was a unique perspective that could be gained in that way. For you, as I was thinking about what the best way to take your talents and keep them so far away from South Beach is that you reference on your show a ton this kind of quirky little nerd nugget. You have become the guy for lineup data for the Cavs.
Yeah.
And so I thought that that would be a really fun way to kind of navigate through some of these various topics of conversations, because as we look ahead to the trade deadline on Thursday, the rest of the season, you got the playoffs, obviously, is a thing that is on the horizon, and we are blessed that we get to say that when it was just a couple years ago that was not a guarantee. Now we got to actually worry about like, well, who can you actually play in the playoffs and things like that? Do they have too many guys? And while depth is particularly nice when you've got guys out of the lineup, especially when you have the positions that were out earlier in the season where you had next man up and there were 5 different options coming off of the bench, a little bit less so lately. Please come back, Dean. But even when you look beyond the playoffs, are they going to be able to re-sign all these guys this summer? Should someone like Karis LeVert on his expiring deal be a possibility in the trade market? Isaac Okoro as an attractive younger player on a decent contract. Like, these are all valid questions as we move ahead beyond today. I guess you could say I'm honestly hoping that I'm secretly hoping that maybe we get a Shams bomb, if you will, during this
Mid pod.
conversation where
Yeah.
we get to, where we get to just blow this whole thing up and talk about that. But like, luck, my luck, we're gonna press stop on the record button and then it'll hit.
Of course.
But I thought that we could have those conversations about those choices that the Cavs are gonna have to make, not just Kenny in who to play, not just Kobe, who to sign, all of that through the lens of what the lineup data is telling us.
Mm.
So, taking it a step further, I used NBA.com, which does not filter out garbage time like cleaning the glass does, which is what you used. So I thought it'd be kind of fun to see how garbage time also fits into, the numbers and the arithmetic in that. So it's safe to say this is a full-on nerd out episode.
Yes, absolutely. And the funny thing is, my use of cleaning the glass has basically come down to NBA.com no longer you really given the functionality to look at what's happening when this player is on and this player is off. Like
Yeah.
that used to be a very accessible thing that they had on there. And now I have to go to cleaning the glass for that. So, there is the added bonus of it filtering out garbage time. But I also am very confused about how they define garbage time. I update my charts and whatnot every game based on how those lineups are doing and whatnot. And I barely got to add any possessions from the win over the Mavericks. When did garbage time start? Was it midway through the first quarter? I don't know. But
It started when they traded Luca.
you know what? It's probably a good case for that. But for me, the funny thing is, I probably consider myself to be a bit more of a film person, but I'll always watch games kind of the second time around because I find live my emotions are always going to get into it. Even though I'm sitting there and I'm taking notes and whatnot, I'm going to get caught up in the moment. There's things I'm going to overlook. I even, sometimes put notes for myself on like basically look back and see what happens, on the rewatch. Like why did it happen this way? This feels this way. Does that line up? And for me, looking over kind of the lineup data is just kind of my check to see, okay, how does this line up with my gut feeling? How does this, match what I'm seeing out there on the court? And if there ever is these massive discrepancies between what I think I'm seeing and what the numbers are telling me, that opens things up to all right, let's explore that further, right? Like let's find out why the tandem of Darius Garland and Jared Allen is bleeding points on the defensive end, even though it's super effective. What's going on there? And you look at the numbers and okay, they're probably getting a little unlucky from opponent 3-point shooting. In on the inverse side, the Mitchell Mobley pairing is probably getting a little lucky there. The rim protection's not been as good, so maybe that's something to look at. Like you just kind of get these helpful hints that you can match along with the film. So that's why I've always found it to be such a handy tool to have.
I'm with you. I'm a bit of a it's funny because I think numbers and analytics, but I watch fan and just like cause and effect and react.
Mm,
I guess the one place that I don't really dive too much is the pure just X's and O's.
mm,
That like I'll notice things in the flow of a game if they stand out, but as far as like really breaking down the film and saying, well, and really like, well, look at how they're coming off a floppy here and they went into horns off of this,
yeah.
and I'm like, that's never I even though I played growing up, it was still just not how I consume. So it's been a bit of a revelation to me to discover some of the more analytics tools as I've gone, and particularly when I started making content about the NBA. It was like, okay, you can't just say, hey, that was good, because why?
Yeah.
You know,
you,
so
you got to back it up a little bit. And for
yeah.
me, one thing I'm always conscious with is because we're doing a podcast, even though we go on YouTube for the majority of them. it's still kind of an audio medium.
Yeah.
So you can't really go full into like the breakdown, like the mind the game or whatever. And the other part is like I don't know how appealing that is. For me, it's more about okay, they're running horns a little higher, or they're running a side action, or because of this personnel, like talking about why they're doing things more so than like identifying the name of the play
Yeah.
and whatnot. Like that to me, I think is more interesting. I think that translates over, and it also just takes a ton of work to cut up clips, to have them for your podcast and whatnot, and especially when we're doing post game half the time, it doesn't it's just difficult to do that. But I think kind of highlighting what the intention is with
Yeah.
stuff that's run is the most important thing, because once you start to see, okay, this is actually how they're manipulating the defense, I think that is more interesting, and that you know gives you greater insight to what's actually happening on the court, rather than play names. And like, we don't want to turn this into homework, right? Like that's just going to suck. So I think that understanding what teams are trying to do, and the other hint, if you're trying to figure out what's actually happening on a basketball court, is the most simple and the most basic tip you can ever be given, which is do not watch the ball. Your eyes are
Yeah.
naturally going to be drawn to it, but if you're watching what's happening everywhere else, you're going to have a better idea of what's actually occurring on the court. And trust me, by the time that shot goes up, your eyes will have gravitated to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I completely agree. One of the many things, we as content creators, I'm sure, have a phone full of ideas that never came to fruition or were really, really dumb. One of them was Off Ball, basically a podcast that was all about what's happening off the ball. That just wasn't gonna work for, what I was trying to do. Anyways, so today, what what we're gonna hit on, I think, to start things off, is this idea of um, who really is the best choice for that fifth spot in the starting
Mm.
lineup, because we've seen Dean Wade there, we've seen Isaac Okoro there, we've seen Max Struess there now. There's We're assuming health, right? We obviously don't know exactly when Wade and Okoro are going to be back in the lineup, but we're assuming health. What is truly the best option of those three? So I wanted to start there as just a quick primer. Of those three, what is your preference?
I My number one choice of the three, assuming all of them are healthy and playing to the best of their abilities, is Max Struess. I think not only for how good he is as a player and how good the fit is, but just how it puts everyone into a more natural position. I think having Dean Wade, like even when he started, he's playing 20 to 22 minutes a night, right? Like when he's coming in off the bench, he's playing 20 to 22 minutes a night. So I wouldn't ever advocate for cutting his minutes, because I think he does have a real impact in those minutes.
Yeah.
But when you look at, you look at the lineup data, when you look at how he plays at various positions and how much better the team is in those spots, I just feel he's better as a four. And I think people are a little too measuring tape obsessed, where they're like, oh, he's 6'10. We need length there. We need, we need to go back to what we had with Lowry, which, when people advocate for, why that marketed lineup was so good, it's usually the wrong reasons, right? Like they're always like, oh, we were so good on the defensive glass. Well, actually, that lineup was one of the worst rebounding lineups, in the league. He got picked on in the play-in by Trae Young and all that. Like, people kind of ignore that. And when you look at Dean Wade, you know, it's almost like people want to fix the defense despite the defense never being an issue.
Yeah.
And if you look position by position, the Cavs with Wade at small forward, it's a +4 net rating. At power forward, +13. At center, +21. Now, I'm not saying he needs to be a full time center, but like, they are wildly better when he's not playing the three. So to me, it's about putting your best foot forward. And no disrespect to Wade, when you look at the lineup data for the last couple of years, starting him's kind of putting your worst foot forward.
Yeah. When I took a look at his, I mean, say they had, according to NBA.com, they have a 7.7 net rating with him in with the core four and a
Yeah.
9.9 with him as a starter. So like maybe maybe the worst foot forward isn't a real bad foot.
No, we are
But
choosing between good options. Like I think he
right.
is completely a viable closer. And I actually think like him coming off the bench makes it easier to close with him. Like
Yeah.
playing Boston tomorrow, I would absolutely love to have Dean Wade. That might be a
Yeah.
closing option in that spot. But I still think the majority of his value coming in off the bench. And I think you're correct to point out that, we are choosing between three good options because the
Yeah.
lineup data is great with all three.
Yeah, I've got Dean Wade at a net of 13 coming off the bench. They're 9-0 in the games that he's come off the bench. But I think the measuring tape point that you brought up and the fact that he is as big as he is, I to me it's more about the positional versatility.
Mm,
The fact that he can switch literally 1 through 5. Yeah, and he can play both that 3 role and 4, and he can step in as a small ball 5 if needed. Like, he represents something that quite literally no one else on the Cavs roster can do,
mhm.
especially when you look outside of the core 4, but really even, like, you're typically not looking at Evan Mobley and saying like, "Alright, go out there and give us some minutes at the 3."
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
So, it's really just his, it's his uniqueness, I think, and how, honestly, overly reliant that they have to be on him in that archetype because he literally is the only archetype that can do the things that he can do, but
mhm,
I tend to agree with you. While my preference at the beginning of the season was to start him because of that versatility,
yep,
once they actually started going and started playing, I quickly realized that it actually becomes a little bit more wonky because they had like 5 guys coming in off the bench and 4 of them were 6'5" guard
yeah,
wings, and I'm like, wait a
yeah.
second. We can balance this thing out a little bit if Wade is coming off the bench." So I I was pleased to see the lineup data actually support that notion. One of those instances where your eye test and your data nerds actually come together. We don't have to all be fighting in the streets. I
Yeah.
promise. The world is going to be okay.
And
But
it's wild to see how big of a gap there is because usually, like the NBA.com lineup data and the cleaning the glass isn't that far off. But
mhm,
when you look at the cleaning the glass data, Wade with the core four, so this isn't just counting those starts. This is every minute that he's played with them or every possession he's
mhm,
played with them. It's only a plus 5.1 net rating. The offensive end has kind of been where that lineup has struggled more.
mhm,
That was normalizing it as he got healthy and played more minutes with them. But it's quite a bit less than the other ones. Like right now, the Okoro one is plus 9.9. The Struce one's plus 31.
yeah,
The Karras one is plus 23. Like it. All four options are great, so it's not like there's a bad one, but it is interesting to see how big of a difference there is between kind of those two data sets.
yeah. That was where I wanted to go since you had said Struce because again, I agree with you, and so do the numbers. Struce with the core four has been insane. You know, NBA.com has him at 29.6, so very close to your 31.
Mhm.
Here's what was interesting to me with Max Struess. So keeping in mind that part of this is going to be ramp up from coming back from an injury, so it's not a perfect one-to-one sample size in terms of his, I guess, f- being ready and being in shape and being in rhythm. As a starter in 8 games, NBA.com has him at a net rating of 20.3. The offensive rating is almost 133 with a defensive rating of just under 112. Coming off the bench, 116.6 offensive rating, 116.1 defensive rating, a net of 0.5 for Max Strus coming off the bench. Am I all right? Help me out here.
Mhm.
Is he literally 20 points better just putting him in the starting lineup?
No. I this is still relatively small sample size.
Yeah.
Um, you look at kind of the number of possessions that they've had with him as a starter. It's only 131 per clean the glass. So obviously, that is filtering out some, but it is a small amount. And the funny thing is, last year when you kind of looked at the various different lineups and whatnot, it wasn't great with Strus, man. Like it was only a plus 2.3 net rating, but it was also a small number of possessions. And we know Darius wasn't himself. We know Mitchell was playing through, the hamstring issues and whatnot. But it's so funny that that sample was so small that the extra 131 possessions that they've had this year bumps the 2-year net rating up to +7. Like that's how small it was last year,
Yeah.
and that's how good it has been this year. And I think one thing that's really benefited Strus is he's just been put into a better context. I think back to media day 2 years ago when we talked to Max and we're basically saying, hey, like, this last year in Miami, you didn't shoot as well from three, but you're taking really hard shots and you were playing without a point guard for so many of these games. How's it going to feel to be playing with great point guards? You got Darius Garland, you got Ricky Rubio, you got Ty Jerome. Like, you got so much depth at that position. And of course, he ended up needing to play a whole lot of point guard, and it tanked his numbers last year. You look at the games that he played with Darius last year, which was over 40. He shot 39% from three in those games. So I think Max is just put in a better context. I think everybody on the team has been put into a better context and under Kenny Atkinson from a scheme standpoint. And then
Yeah.
also just from an availability standpoint, like always having one of Darius, Donovan, or Ty Jerome out there just makes the life of a spot up shooter so much easier. Because it's Max, he's still going to take insanely hard shots. Like I think sometimes he's his own worst enemy when it comes to the shot quality. But we've been through this experience before. We had J.R. Smith on the roster. We know what someone with no conscience from three can do to bend the rest of the defense, regardless of hot and cold spells. So I think what he brings as a movement shooter, what he brings as a playmaker, which I think is greater than Okoro or Wade. I think he's a little more capable of guarding down than Wade. Like I think I feel better about him defending, guards than I do with Wade. Wade can get a little handsy in those spots. I just feel like he is that perfect medium between what you have with Okoro, what you have with Wade, what you have with Karras. I think he's just kind of that perfect blend to have with the starters right now.
I think he is too, and I think he adds a level of forgive me for saying a word that I'm not even sure is real, dynamism
Mm,
to that's the context of playing with the core four that the others just don't. Nobody else in the I guess other than Ty Jerome, who we didn't see coming doing this stuff, like even a Sam Merrill, like while he's obviously he's had his struggles from three this year, but he's respected as a 3-point shooter and a marksman. It's not in the same way as Max Strus. Like
yeah.
there's not really anybody other than when you take like Mitchell and Garland out of the equation, when you talk about the role player guys, there's not really anybody else that the defense was always going to be accounting for out to the logo.
Mhm.
Right. And like that just it creates that extra couple steps that can be a big difference for that defender trying to cover that ground once you get to somebody like Evan Mobley in the short roll or something. Just it gives them that extra kind of nanosecond, if you will, for that play to develop before the defense can rotate. That Strus gives you that, like Dean Wade certainly is not,
Yeah.
right? Like he he's a very respectable 3-point shooter in a spot up, and we love it when he shoots it with confidence. The defense, if you give them the option between guarding Strus and guarding Dean Wade to the 3-point line, let alone beyond it, like they're all 5 of them are running at Strus if those are the 2 options. So, having that, Okoro was one of the biggest shocks to me of the entire
Hmm.
season before he hurt his shoulder, just the way that he was actually shooting confidently off a movement above the break
Hmm.
and actually doing things in the short roll, which we've literally never seen him do. So like those were very positive steps, and I think were a massive lift to the offense as a whole. But still, they were shocking to us, fans of this team
Yeah.
that love watching them play and are overly obsessive about our guys on our team. The defense is they were not going to be prepared for any of that at all. But
Mm.
with Strus, they were always going to be accounting for that, and that's a I think something that truly benefits the starting lineup because it gives them all the ability to kind of go into the stuff that actually makes them great too.
Hmm.
And they don't have to create that gravity that Strus
Yeah.
creates for them.
Yeah, and I think another advantage of Max is, he's a good screen setter, so you can involve him in kind of those 3-man actions with one of the bigs and a ball handler. Um, and I say this incredibly affectionately. This is one of the reasons why I think Struce is one of my favorite Cavs role players. Is he's a dick. Like he's going to play like a dick out there. He's going to be physical. He's going to get in people's faces. And I think that's something they need. They're self-proclaimed a bunch of nice young men, right? Like they need to have that guy that's not afraid to mix it up. I've joked about this on the podcast, but I think of everyone on the team, Max is the person Kenny can trust the least. When he starts twirling that finger, he will slap someone on the elbow and argue the call. Like
Yeah.
he's a lunatic out there. But I think that's an element that this team needs. I think when I look at what he and George bring, in particular from a vocal standpoint, I think it's infectious, and I think you've seen kind of the team come into its own a little bit more and more, and feed off of that energy, particularly now that George has been playing so damn well for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Every team needs some guys out there with a little bit of an edge, especially when they can do it while remaining under control. We're not talking about a couple of Draymond Greens, right?
Hmm.
There's an over, a cup runneth over of that particular trait that you can get into trouble. They kind of have the right level of being willing get a little to get a little scrappy in ways that some of their other guys wouldn't naturally want to do, but I think also kind of emboldens them and empowers them to feel like they can get in there and mix it up too.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess that leaves us with Okoro. I mentioned it earlier. He was having a ridiculous shooting season. He's been really great with the starting group as well. NBA.com had him at a 13 net rating as a starter
Hmm.
in those 16 games, 11.4 when playing with the core four. In 148 minutes, he and Wade are the two that have played the most with the core four together, and probably have the closest thing to a sample size that we feel like we have reached statistical relevance to have this conversation. So, by no means has he played poorly, but I had seen this concept thrown out in the Cavs discourse of, does Isaac Okoro still have value to this team if he's coming off the bench?
Hmm.
Like, or is what he does, the his ability as a point of attack defender and the way that he's been this year shooting prior to the injury, like, is that just so perfectly tailored for what the core four needs that once you start bringing him in to those, second units, maybe they need more, particularly offensively,
Yeah,
than what he's able to give them in that spot. Coming off the bench, 11.5 net rating. They still
yeah,
have an offensive rating of 120. So it's not like it doesn't the numbers don't bear out that he sucks coming off the bench and that there's no value there. But you do kind of wonder with Strus playing as well as he does, Wade. We haven't even gotten into the Leverts, potentially the Merrills, the Ty Jeromes, where they need to get their minutes from. Where are you with Isaac Okoro right now, particularly this week with the trade deadline looming?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm worried about the shoulder. Obviously, when he came back, it just wasn't the same. It might have been, one of those instances where the pain had subsided, but the functional strength hadn't returned. Because the ball was leaving his hands so consistently, and that was one of the biggest changes I saw this year compared to the past. I don't really understand the whole only having value with the starters thing, just because particularly this year they've been defending teams straight up. Like, even when he was playing with the starters, he wasn't out there defending point guards. Darius is still taking on that challenge. What I liked in particular in that Warriors matchup, that thinking back to, was Kenny putting him on Draymond. And I think that's why the first game against the Warriors worked so much better than the second, where Okoro was on Draymond, so that anytime Draymond was coming up to set that screen for Steph, Okoro was there to blow up that action. Um, and I just think with him coming in off the bench, I like him more as a shooting guard. Like, I think that's where he can
Mhm.
play, that's where he plays the best. He can play a lot of that point of attack defense. I also think with the second units, um, that's when you're not going to have two bigs out there on the court. Your point of attack defense is going to be so much more important because you don't have that backline support of both Mobley and Allen being out there. So, from an Okoro standpoint, I actually think it's more about getting him consistent minutes rather than starting. I think to
Mm.
start the year, he wasn't comfortable with the new role yet. The minutes were a little bit sporadic, and then he found his footing as a starter. I think even last year, like, he had a really good regular season, and that was primarily coming in off the bench. It was just an instance of, hey, when he gets more minutes, he gets more comfortable. Doesn't, you know, he's not picking his spots the same way. Like, it's not a situation where he feels like if he's going to miss a shot, he's going to be pulled out of the game. So obviously, I hope that he can get healthy. I really would like to keep Okoro on this team. I think from a point of attack defense standpoint, someone that can defend, 1 through 4, I think pretty damn comfortably. He's someone that I really do value. And I think because he came out earlier, sometimes people overlook that this guy's like a month older than Evan Mobley. But when you have a guy that, statistically, when you talk to film people and whatnot, is regarded as one of the best point of attack defenders in the league and has shot 39% from three the last 3 calendar years here, like,
Mhm.
that's not someone that I want to give up on, particularly when they're making less than the middle level exception. So I actually think, even though it's not a question of him remaining in the starting lineup and that being the most effective, I do think the question of how do we get him more consistent minutes might need to be in the forefront of their minds heading into this trade deadline, because they have such a glut at kind of that guard position that if they can reallocate some of that to the front court and open up minutes where, maybe it is Karras, maybe it is someone like that you move for a 3-4, so you have a little bit of weight insurance, and that opens up time for Isaac Okoro and even maybe Max Strus to play more minutes at the 2. Maybe that's the way that you kind of rationalize this and think this through moving forward.
Yeah, I think it the impact defensively is substantial.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter who he's out there with. The defensive numbers back up his value to them, and I think him not being out and not being right in the month of January when their defense completely tanked, for lack of a better way to put that,
Yeah.
it I think it reflects, how important he is, because they don't we talk about Dean Wade as a guy who is unique on this roster. He's a one of one. Isaac Okoro is unique on this roster as a one of one in the context of a point of attack defender.
Yeah.
And I've heard Carter mention him as like a defensive specialist in that way. But if he's right, it's not so specialized this year. that it's hurting on the offensive end to have him out there. He's not, I don't know, McDaniel's out in Minnesota for stretches that they dealt with him. He's certainly not. The defensive specialist that always pops into my head is back in the day. I don't know if you even remember this name, Andre Roberson.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's a defensive specialist. You know, like Isaac Okoro is not tanking this offense when he's out there, but for all the reasons that we just said we like him, and all the reasons that he has value to this Cavs team, it's also all of those reasons that he's actually attractive.
Yep.
If you were going to be talking to the Cavs about a trade, I don't know how many guys that the Cavs wouldn't just hang up the phone on carry more potential value in a deal for at least the names we've heard, right? Like a Cam Johnson's been beaten into the ground. Let's go ahead and get out our hammer for a second.
Yeah.
The idea that the Brooklyn Nets would even possibly consider a Cavs trade package, which is not going to be the best probably in that they could even get, and it not have Isaac Okoro in it would shock me, because they don't have a ton of draft assets to give. So the next thing that you would want in a rebuild is youth,
It
upside.
actually, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me a ton, just because a lot of the reporting indicates that, cap flexibility and being a free agent player is a big motivation for them. So that's almost a spot where I would look at, Karras and maybe even Sam Merrill being the primary salary filler. And then from a draft compensation standpoint, you'd have 2031 and you'd have Jalen Tyson, right? Where, Tyson's not making a lot, and you could kind of talk yourself into that being like a first round pick, right? Similar
Yeah.
to Ochai Agbaji in the Mitchell trade. So I think that would probably be the most likely package. As much as they may value Okoro, not having that money on the books might be more attractive. That would be the only way I could see it. But who knows? Maybe, they held very firm when it came to Dorian Finney-Smith at last year's deadline. I think that came back to bite them a little bit, although they could argue that, we got a former All-Star back. And, he's on the cover of Slam magazine. Dorian Finney-Smith was on the cover of Slam. So maybe you could argue that. But, we've seen teams hold firm for ridiculous offers. I think, you look at some of the reporting around like Jeremy Grant deals in this past offseason, and it's like, okay, why are they asking for 2 firsts? Shouldn't they be giving up one to get off that contract? Like what like, how teams value this is going to be wildly different. So I would be open. Like I think you have to be open to exploring all possibilities that don't involve the core. And honestly, like probably not here at the deadline, but I think you have to listen to what options are available at all times, right? Like even if you have 99% conviction that you're not going to go down that road, it would be negligent to not, right? So I'd be open to that, but I think if you're getting to a situation where you're moving Okoro in a deal, I think I would want somebody with term, like beyond just this season and next season, even. Like I'd want someone that is going to be a long time role player for this team. And the other thing you have to be conscious of is if the player you're getting in return does not replicate that skill set, you're going to need to go out and find that. That is now a hole kind of within your rotation that you need to figure out. That hole might exist if Isaac Okoro's offense doesn't translate to the playoffs, and it makes it hard to have him out there defensively. But I do think one of the encouraging things for me this year is seeing him used in a variety of ways. You've seen him used as a screener, seeing him, in the short roll and all that. Because if how you're using him offensively is you're going to stand in that corner and you're going to get 4 passes to you, and how you perform on those 4 passes is going to dictate whether or not we keep you in the game. Like that's you're putting them in such a tough position. How often do we see Darius or Donovan miss their first 4 threes in a game? Like if you miss your first 2 and you get pulled, that's going to suck. That's going to mess with your confidence. So finding ways to contribute in those other ways that, even if the shot's not falling, you are still having an impact, and it makes it feasible to have him out there for defensive purposes. I think that was going to give him a better chance of, being a successful piece in this playoff rotation. But now, obviously, we have a little bit of a question with the shoulder, so that sucks because he's been one of the more durable players. But that would at least be, my hesitation in involving him in any trade deadline deals.
I agree. So there's two pathways that have been kicked around a lot for the Cavs at this trade deadline. One is whether they would do a move like a Cam Johnson, really go for it with somebody. And then the other is, would they try to duck the luxury tax?
Mhm.
And Isaac Okoro for me is one of those, if you are doing this because you are trying to bring in somebody that you think makes you a better contender and gives you a better chance at winning a title this year, Isaac Okoro is on the board. Let's have a conversation. If you are doing this to save Dan Gilbert some money and get him into the non-tax paying pool at the end of the season, do not touch Isaac Okoro. He is too good for what we need on this
Yeah,
roster for the Cavs. Like, don't come here with that for me, anyways. So that's kind of where I am with Isaac Okoro. I can live with him being a part of something that is meant to make them better. I can't live with him being a part of something that is making us worse to save some money.
yeah.
So that, I guess that's a natural enough transition into Karis LeVert. Um, so he is the guy. He's the guy that during the offseason I thought made a lot of sense to explore, to maybe even try to get before the extensions and stuff were even signed. I was thinking about, like, when the Atlanta Hawks made the deal for DeJounte Murray to bring back Dyson Daniels, and it seemed like maybe they were pushing for a little bit of a youth movement in
Mhm.
Atlanta, and to keep uh to turn more over and kind of restructure what they were doing around Trey Young.
Were you thinking about
If
Karis for Larry at that time too?
no, I was I
Okay.
was I was thinking about Karras for DeAndre Hunter
Oh yeah, yeah.
as a they they get some salary relief with a guy who had had plenty of injury issues and stuff, but still fit a archetype that I thought was perfect for what the Cavs could use. I still do.
Yeah, you
Then
and me both. Honestly,
they
Hunter's higher on my list of wants than Cam Johnson.
oh,
I
I agree.
I, I think age, physicality, the fact that he contributes on the board. Both of them have pretty strong playoff histories. Like when they've been in the postseason, they've played well in those spots. I just feel like he addresses more needs. He's younger, and both of these players, like, doesn't get talked about enough with Cam Johnson, but both of these guys do have injury histories,
Yeah.
right? And Cam is older. Not only that, Cam had part of his meniscus removed. Trust me, I'm missing part of mine. It sucks. Like, like knees really, really suck. So, like, that's the type of thing that would concern me just a little bit if you're consolidating all of kind of your assets and chips that you have remaining into this guy. So I don't know. Like with Atlanta, like when Brian Windhorst went on ESPN Cleveland and was talking about how the Cavs have gotten offers for Karras, teams are approaching them about Karras. It's kind of all been defensive players that both make more this year and into the future. I was like, defensive wings that make more than Karras, that have future money. DeAndre Hunter was like the first name that came to mind there. If there's a path to that, it'd be interesting. We would obviously have to add additional players to match that salary. The
Yeah.
only other ones I could think of, I'm like, well, maybe if I squint and Wendy thinks that Patrick Williams plays defense, but he doesn't really. Like, from a Cavs standpoint, I'm not doing that. I don't know
No.
who else would fit that bill, but I am 100% on with you, man. Like, Hunter would be my dream outcome. And I think Karras has been underappreciated. But from a Cavs standpoint, you have to look at
Yeah.
years of team control. You have to think, both this year and beyond. That's a move that you could argue could be a plus, could be a lateral move. You, depending on what you need, maybe you need Karras's ball handling, right? Like he does bring a lot to the table, but that's a lateral move that maybe gives you, an asset moving forward. Maybe there is a little more upside. Maybe there's, you know, maybe you can make up Karras in the aggregate by giving more minutes to a Ty Jerome who's been playing great, by ensuring now Isaac Okoro is going to get more minutes at the two. And, we're just going to play a little more conventionally. We're going to play a little bigger. We're going to have a little more athleticism on the court. Like, I get the cases for both sides. So it's a tough decision for Kobe. I don't even know if this decision's on the table.
Yeah.
But I'm that's definitely a name that I am keeping an eye on.
I would love it. Again, it was in the off season that I was thinking about it. Then they both came out and started playing the best basketball of their careers, and I was
Yeah.
like, well, we probably both would have been happy if we'd have done that deal, but like it's definitely not happening now, because why in the world would Atlanta want to get off a guy that's having a career year on their side? I mean, you
Especially when they
obviously
don't own their pick. That's the thing, man. Like, it's going their year's kind of going to hell, but like their pick is owned by the Spurs, if I recall correctly. Like, you know,
yeah.
tanking and giving a top pick in one of the best drafts to play with Wemby would be less than ideal for them.
Yeah, not great. Not great, Bob.
Yeah.
No, it was just something that I thought of then. I don't know now. I mean, granted, we say this. I think I don't think there's almost any likelihood of it happening, and then our phone's gonna buzz, and that's exactly what's gonna happen.
Yep.
But it's that type of thing though that it does get back to us, whether it's him or somebody else, but it's that balance. It balances out the roster in a way where you get something that you don't have a ton of. You're not overly reliant on Dean Wade to be the only guy that's like that, and you have other ways to cobble together what Karras does offensively as a guard through these other guys that are also playing out of their minds, like a Ty Jerome. Like, what in the world happened to Ty Jerome to get us here to where we're actually talking about, oh, do you move off of Karis LeVert so that Ty Jerome can get more run? Like, what?
We did refer. Yeah, I'll toot our horn here. We did refer to Ty Jerome as Karis Insurance, and when first the signing was made, and then coming into this year, obviously this year we had the caveat of if he's going to stay healthy, if he's able to return to form. But basically, like the way we had talked about him is Karras, there's an up and down with him, right? I don't
Yeah.
think Ty's going to come with the same kind of scoring upside and be able to give you kind of the highs. He's going to give you a more consistent floor, right? Like he doesn't turn the ball over. Not a great defender, but he's going to, be active with steals. He's going to be physical in those spots. I did not expect, to be very wrong about the high upside part where, he all of a sudden will hit a million threes and just has these kind of explosive spurts. So I think it's a good problem to have. But I think once again, when you're walking into a trade deadline, you have to look, where are our redundancies? Where do we have enough depth where we can afford to trim some of this to address a need or strengthen a strength, right? Like I think
Mhm.
if you were to trade for Cam Johnson, let's say, it's Karras, Tyson, and the pick or whatever the case may be. If you were to do that, Cam's not addressing a need, but he gives you a shooter with size. He redistributes your rotation a little bit. Like it it's making your strengths better. And I think that there's a big advantage of that, especially when you are one of the best teams in the league. Um, Getting better at one of your strengths and making, the best offense in NBA history even better. There's an appeal to that.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to turn this into the Cam Johnson show, but I do think there's also something too. If you were to write down on paper, just pencil them in: Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Cam Johnson, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen. That's the best starting five in basketball.
Yeah. Yep.
Position, it just collective. It is. I don't know. I don't know who.
It's them in Boston, I guess. And
Yeah,
and maybe OKC when healthy, assuming Hardenstein, Chat. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
amazing. Like, it's at the very least, it's in that conversation, and, like,
yeah,
that's the important thing, right?
right, right. I think it's Boston is a good one. I think the Thunder are they're 4.
Mhm.
They're 4 definitely go up, but then you start, again, you're nitpicking at that point in time, but I think there's an inherent value to feeling like you've got the best shot as soon as the ball goes up in the air. But if anybody listened to last Monday's podcast, I spent so much time talking about how concerned I would be about the health of Cam Johnson going all in on that, and then you end up getting like 10 games out of him and he's shut down for the playoffs. Like, because that's been the reality. So I'm fully I don't know truly that Cam Johnson is the guy
Mhm.
that you push all your chips into the center of the table for. Truthfully, I don't. I think he is probably the best guy on the market that might be an option to do it for, and I
Yep.
think he does. Again, I think he gives you, to your credit of being more even keel about it, at least one of the best starting fives in basketball
Yeah.
i- if you did it. But I still don't know that he's the guy that I would want to bank all of the future on, um,
And
because of that
being
health
and
history.
and being, I think he would start, but being maybe a little controversial. I think there's maybe a chance that Struce would be the better fit still with the starters, and Cam Johnson is just playing a ton of minutes, and he is kind of that
Potentially.
guy that gives you some weight
Yeah.
insurance, and you close with him. But like, maybe they find, hey, like, Cam Johnson's not putting the ball on the floor. He's not playmaking. He's not creating opportunities for others. He's not running pick and rolls and stuff like that. Maybe you want to maintain that. Maybe you want that with Max Strus, and you really value, what Cam can do to space the floor, both, as you stagger throughout the game, and maybe even, closing time. So it's I don't think it would be an open shut case that he would be the best fit even with the starting lineup.
That's a very interesting point because it also reminds me of a conversation that I was having. I went on the Sports Ethos Hawks cast last week for a preview of that matchup, and I asked him, like, why is DeAndre Hunter not starting these games, especially with Jalen Johnson now out for the year? And they said is they like him coming off the bench. As soon as he gets over like 28 minutes or so, that knee swells up like a balloon, and that's when he starts having those problems. They're able to manage his minutes more and hold it. And I wonder if there's not a lesson to be learned there for a guy like Cam Johnson. Even if you were to be able to bring him in, is that a way that you could keep him healthier?
Yeah,
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 and
totally. I
potentially.
think honestly, I think even if he was starting, I wouldn't expect him to play more than,
Yeah,
the 27, 28 minutes,
yeah.
because nobody is, man. Like, the stars aren't really, and when you have the depth that the Cavs have, you got to give like all these guys their 24 minutes a night. So I think people put too much stock into who's starting. I
Yeah,
always think who's closing it is more important, but
yeah.
like, you look at it, man, like, their starting lineup, no matter who it is, they're playing like 12 minutes a night. Like, that's why it takes so long for, the max lineup data to, you know, filter in here, is because
Yeah.
that lineup's not playing a lot of minutes. And it's great, the fact that it's going so well too when they're playing together works against it, because there's fewer fourth quarters that they're going to play
Yeah.
together because they're all sitting.
Yeah, it's the opposite of the Knicks problem, right? Our guys
Yeah.
actually get some rest. But yeah, like I I do wonder too, like you can't play 11 guys in the playoffs, right? Like
Mhm.
that's not a thing that is gonna happen. I wouldn't think.
No.
So when I start thinking about what, let's say they don't go after a Cam Johnson type of a swing, what would it be if you were just trying to get some insurance along the margins and stuff? Like, you already can't play 11.
Yeah.
We gonna bring in a couple of
I
is
here's
it
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying?
the I think the thing is, anyone that you bring in, Like if you're talking about bio candidates as an example, like Torrey Craig got bought out today. I would love to add
That's
him
a
as
that's a
Dean
name
Wade
that has
insurance.
been on my that's a
Yeah.
name that I've been very interested in this year.
And to have him as weight insurance, I think would be important. And the idea isn't, oh, he's part of your playoff nine. It's, hey, you have an injury or maybe there's some foul trouble and we need 5 to 7 minutes from you in
Yeah,
a playoff game. Can you do that without like throwing up over your own feet? I think what you would want to have is basically a situation where you're playing 8 or 9, but who that 8th or ninth guy is going to change based on matchup. It's going to change based on who is playing well. You know, so you kind of have the variety of options. Like, I think someone like Sam Merrill, I wouldn't expect him to be part of an opening playoff rotation, but hey, maybe there are some spots where you know Kenny wants to get some shooting on there. Let's go to Sam and let him play. I think like as currently constructed, you have your starters with Struess, you have Levert, you have Okoro, you have Wade. And I think your ninth guy from there is going to be either George or Ty Jerome based on what they need. I can see Kenny go 10 and have all of those guys, but I do think there's going to be matchups where, you know, what Ty brings to the table isn't as necessary, where, you know, it's a little harder to play George or maybe Okoro's struggling. So I think who that 8 or 9 is going to be matchup dependent and based on how guys are playing. I think you'll feel better if guys 10 through 13 are someone that, hey, maybe can absorb some spot minutes in a playoff series.
yeah, yeah. That Torrey Craig is one that's definitely been on my mind throughout this season so far. I think that's kind of the exact sort of move on the margins that I think could make a ton of sense, especially as a buyout candidate, where you're literally just cutting a prorated check
Yeah.
yeah, and to bring him in and strengthen yourself in that way. Because all it does is give Kenny another tool, a tool that he doesn't have a ton of to absorb. Again, Wade misses a lot of time. You got another option. You got another body. Um, and he does all the things that you want in that spot. He can shoot it. He can defend. He's been around. He's got the size. We're good to go. I know Mac has been high on a guy like Duop Reith, as a potential backup big, things like that. I'm curious to see with some of these bigger moves. And it didn't happen with Luca. It didn't happen with De'Aaron Fox. We'll see whatever goes on with like a Jimmy Butler or any of these other potential moves that are out there. If the Cavs can't find a way to kind of sneak their way in as a facilitator to address a little bolstering to um, add one of those pieces kind of more on the margins, even if they don't take a big swing.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And, you know, I think it's going to be an interesting buyout market, especially when you look at, you know, paying role guys hasn't been many teams mo, and I think
Yeah,
that makes trading for some of these guys that are very helpful players but making in like that 10 million range, it's really tough to get those guys like Chris
yeah,
Boucher. Anyone would love him, but it's tough to find the matching salary there and to throw an additional second round pick or whatever the case may be. So I do think teams are going to be faced with a tough decision of, okay, like, do we really hold on to this guy hoping we can get a second round pick, or do we just buy out our veteran? Do we let Jonas Valanciunas, Chris Boucher, Lonzo Ball, Ben Simmons, and all these different guys, do we just buy them out and let teams go to them?
yeah. It's going to be interesting. I'm sure now that we talked about it, something will happen as soon as I hit stop on this recording. Is there
Yeah.
anything we didn't hit that you got an inkling to you just itching to get a take out there? We're wide open here.
God, I don't think so. Obviously, I'm curious to see how this game against Boston goes. Um, but man, I just think when it comes to tweaks around the margins and all that, we tend to overrate it a little bit. You look at teams that have won the offseason, quote unquote. It's often like moves like Gabe Vincent or um, Tyus Jones going to Phoenix and stuff that ultimately doesn't actually move the needle a whole lot. What's going to move the needle is how good Evan Mobley gets by,
Yeah.
mid-May, how good Darius gets, how healthy they are, how the existing lineups they have continue to gel. Like, you can get the perfect role player, but it's going to come down to the stars. So I think it's fun to get caught up in the and be prisoner of the moment when it comes to the trade deadline, but the most important parts are currently on the roster, and that internal development is going to be the most important thing.
Yeah. I it's it's a star-driven league, and they're gonna make or break you when it comes down to it. Really what we're doing is haggling over kind of those extra, just that little extra incremental, maybe you need it, maybe you don't kind of thing if you're not going for one of those kind of bigger swings, if you will.
Mhm.
Justin, this was a lot of fun for me. Please plug anything on the way out as if people don't already know.
Hey, you never know, man. Like, that's one of those things about us being out of market. You never know where our reach is, where the blind spots are, and whatnot. Really appreciate you having me on, man. Anytime, more than happy to come back. Wherever you found this podcast, you can probably find the Chase Down podcast. You guys know how to find podcasts. Search the name. We also go live on the Cavs YouTube channel, so you can find us there. I'm on Twitter and Blue Sky at Cavs Canada. Slap the Cavs in Canada. You'll find me there. I don't do a lot of posting these days because I'm just exhausted with both platforms, but I am on there. So you can find me, connect there.
All right, thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, man.
If you made it to the end, please leave a like if you're on YouTube. Rate the show 5 stars on whatever podcast app that you're using. Right now, it'd go a super long way to helping the show and let those evil algorithms know that we are willing, we are actually worthy and willing to be shown to new people. Now that the episode's over, go ahead and open your app store and download the Sports Ethos app for one of the best blurb feeds in the business. Cavs players, fantasy tools, updates, news, all available in the Sports Ethos app. As always, I'm Zach. That was Justin. Thanks for nerding out with us, Cavs fans.